Silent Hill 3 is my favorite game out of the whole Silent Hill series. I love it even more than Silent Hill 2, which a lot of people consider to be the best. And today I'm going to explain exactly why I love Silent Hill 3 more. This game is all about refinement. It takes the survival horror elements of the Silent Hill series and it just one-ups everything a bit. A lot of people think that the game is too similar to Silent Hill 2, but in my opinion, this game actually takes a lot of the expectations that Silent Hill 2 sets and it turns them on their heads. Of course, this is all just my humble opinion that I'm going to explain, so without further ado, let's get into the video. The first thing I want to get out of the way is that I'm going to be comparing Silent Hill 3 to Silent Hill 2 a lot in this review, so I'm going to talk about Silent Hill 2 a lot, and that's because, like I said before, most people consider Silent Hill 2 to be the best game out of the series, and so I think it's important to talk about exactly why I like 3 more than that game and how I think the 2 stack up in my own personal preferences. So in a way, this video is not only a review of Silent Hill 3, but it's also kind of a review of Silent Hill 2 as well. And as the 2 games structurally are very similar in the way they play, that's all the more reason I do find it important to talk about these 2 games together.
What a nightmare.
So first of all, let's talk about the story. I just want to say I will spoil some aspects of Silent Hill 3's story, so you've been warned. Silent Hill 3 tells a bit more traditional story than Silent Hill 2 does. It returns to the plot line of the original game, unlike Silent Hill 2, whose story has nothing to do with the original game's plot line. Now I know everyone rants and raves about how amazing Silent Hill 2's story is, and I will concede that Silent Hill 2 does tell a more artistic story and narrative, and it really is a work of art. I'll agree with that. But the story of Silent Hill 3 is not bad at all. Like I said, it continues the plot threads of the original, and in my opinion, there's some great twists and turns to it. Once again, Silent Hill 2's narrative is quite amazing, but it's not actually related at all to the overarching narrative of Silent Hill. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I like the fact that Silent Hill 3 is actually a direct sequel, and I think it does great things with its story and the characters within it. It pulls you into Heather's nightmare, and it starts by making players wonder why exactly are there monsters appearing in places outside of Silent Hill. And I think this is a pretty great hook. That, along with Douglas's introduction as well, adds to the mystery of Heather's story as you wonder what exactly he and Claudia and the monsters have to do with her. The mystery and intrigue is great as you wonder exactly what Heather has to do with everything that's going on. We slowly learn more, and of course later on, the reveal that Heather is basically Alessa, and the further reveal that she is pregnant with a god is just, it's a crazy twist and I love it. It ties well back into the story of the first game, and I think the way it actually goes through the story is quite good. I don't think the story of this game gets enough credit. Another thing that I really enjoy is Heather as the protagonist, because I feel like she has a really good fleshed out personality.
I'm not a child, you know. Are you sure it's not you who's afraid to be alone?
She's a strong character that stands well on her own without overdoing it or resorting to being a jerk all the time, which is often a pitfall of the strong independent character archetype, where sometimes the writers don't actually know how to write a strong character, so they just make them behave like an asshole to everyone around them to make them seem super tough and independent, or they just make everything they do just be total badass so they can be like, oh look guys, she's strong and independent, without having to, you know, like actually give them real character traits. Instead they can just hide behind making them into a superhero. And Heather has a great personality and stands well on her own without falling into any of those tropes. She does have some attitude to her, but it's justified, it's not over the top, and also honestly it's about what you'd expect from a teenager. I mean, really.
Heather, I need to speak with you. My name is Douglas Cartland. I'm a detective.
A detective? Really? Well, nice talking to you.
She's a very well-rounded character because she's a pretty average, flawed teenager, just like a real person. But she's still capable enough to hold her own against these monsters, and she has what it takes to stand on her own without falling over every 5 seconds, literally, like one of my other favorite female characters, Jill. And compare her to someone like James Sunderland, who's a bit of a buffoon by comparison. I mean, really, just look at this guy. Now, okay, look, alright, slow down. Before you go and make a mess in the comments and telling me I don't know what I'm talking about, yes, I know that James' character is supposed to be kind of, foolish like this. I get it. It's part of the narrative of the game. I get it. But as a character, I'm telling you I like the portrayal of Heather better. She's a great character who I think is really well written, and it's a treat to play as her. Her personality just really shines through, and I thoroughly enjoy all the cutscenes with her. And hell, even some of the bits of flavored text that come up when you examine stuff in the game is filled with personality, and I love it. She and the rest of the cast of Silent Hill 3 feel completely three-dimensional and more like real people, while I feel like some of the performances in, say, Silent Hill 2 were kind of wooden by comparison.
I'm looking for someone.
Who is it?
Someone very important to me.
Which leads me to another point. The voice acting and general delivery of the dialogue is much improved in Silent Hill 3 over previous games. Now granted, it's still not perfect, but in previous games the dialogue just felt not great sometimes. The delivery always just seemed a bit off. And once again, Silent Hill 3's dialogue and voice acting is not perfect, but the voice acting is much, much better than what came before, especially for Heather. The characters feel much more real in Silent Hill 3 because they sound more real. But I will say that bad voice acting has always kind of been a staple in these earlier survival horror games, and Silent Hill is not the only game series with this problem. In fact, it's not the one that's most infamously known for bad voice acting either. I'm sure you know what I mean.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
Moving on, let's talk about the sound design of this game. Both the music and the sound design of the game itself are exceptional. The soundtrack is just as good as ever, and has a wide range of tracks for all kinds of situations. It's totally a classic, and sometimes I'll even just listen to this game's soundtrack when I'm doing other stuff. I mean, it's that good. Really, it is. Sound plays a huge role in this game. Of course, there's the classic radio static that's key to every Silent Hill game, and the terrifying noises that enemies make, which adds stress and anxiety to combat encounters. Every time I hear this awful metallic scraping and screeching noise, I know there's pendulums around, and I'm like, oh god, oh no, oh, here we go again, more of these things. And that's something that's kind of interesting about this game versus previous games. A lot of the enemies are very noisy, meaning that oftentimes you hear the actual enemies making sound before you hear the telltale static of the radio. Hell, you don't even get the radio till you've already had several encounters with enemies. And that's not a big deal, right? Sure, it's just a little detail. But when things get interesting is when you come across a segment where you hear the radio static, but you don't hear any monsters. Just silence. This is the point where the game subverts your expectations, because up to this point, you've heard the dreaded, terrible noises of the monsters way before you even saw them, and now, just static. Where's it coming from? What am I gonna encounter? It must be something new, right? It's not making any noise, but where is it? Is it coming at me? And that's what adds so much tension to some of these encounters. This is something that happens, for example, when you first pick up the shotgun, and the subtlety of this is brilliant because it's something you don't even really realize, but the encounter seems different from other encounters because all of a sudden, the enemy is completely unknown. It really is brilliant. And speaking of brilliant, some of the moments in this game that get to me the most are not necessarily the moments when you're being chased by monsters. It's the moments of total and complete silence when you're zoned in, you're running around, you're wandering along a lonely hallway, there's no monsters, and your guard is down, and all of a sudden you hear it. The game does this in a lot of the empty areas, and it's super effective at making me paranoid. In fact, the last time I played through Silent Hill 3 very recently was the first time I really noticed just how many of these sounds there are. And there were several points where it freaked me out, and I honestly thought there was something pounding on my roof or pounding on the wall and right outside my house. I mean, honestly, I physically looked over and I was like, oh wait, no, it's the game. It's crazy what this can do to you. It's really ridiculous. And it's also crazy that I never remember hearing all this before. But it's possible that part of it is that it's easier for me to pick up on these details because I'm wearing headphones when I'm playing this game compared to back in the day playing on a low quality TV with crappy built-in speakers and background noise. A lot of those details were probably kind of lost, and it might have been that way for a lot of people too. Because like I said, I didn't even realize this was in the game, really. Either way, it's terrifyingly brilliant in the paranoia it creates through and through. Next, I want to talk a bit about the gameplay and level design, which brings me to Silent Hill 3's wonderful opening. This game immediately throws you into the fire by putting you up against all these enemies in an unfamiliar setting, and I absolutely love it. Once again, it subverts your expectations. In a lot of other survival horror games, including Silent Hill 2, you get introduced to combat and enemies in a cutscene after some tense, slow build-up, and the game goes, okay, here's a weapon. It's time for your first encounter. I hope you're ready for this. And I will admit that this is a memorable and effective technique. I mean, everyone remembers the opening of Resident Evil with the zombie that you fight. Or the opening of Silent Hill 2, same thing with the lion figure you come up against. But Silent Hill 3 throws your expectations out the window by almost immediately putting you into danger. Granted, this amusement park section isn't exactly super difficult, and you can just die and progress the game anyway because it's a dream sequence, but it's effective at setting the tone of the game. And the amusement park itself is pretty terrifying. And to be fair, you know, this is the opening area of the game. It's not meant to be super brutal, but it is effective. But then, after this hellish opening, we are given a moment to catch our breath. We get a nice big cutscene, a nice nostalgia-inducing soundtrack, at least to me, set against the late afternoon sun. This whole segment here, this sets the pace for the rest of the game, where we see large segments of fast, intense gameplay, mostly consisting of trying to avoid enemies while exploring and solving puzzles, followed with some slower segments with much fewer enemies and a sort of breather to change the pace of the game. I find this technique works really well and keeps a good pace. It breaks up the monotony of just go, 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 one room, another room, need the key, okay, I have to backtrack from point A to point B. It adds some more exploration to the game, and it establishes the game as not only horror-filled with intense sections with many enemies, but also as lonely, somber, and sometimes paranoid, as I mentioned with the sound design, where a lot of times in these kind of abandoned sections you get these crazy noises that makes you go, oh geez. It divides the game nicely into segments, and you can really feel as you're transitioning from one to another. I like the structure of it, it's very nice and structured. As for the levels themselves, I really love what Silent Hill 3 has done here. Overall, I just really enjoy the layout of this game, more so than previous entries in the series. I just think it's done a little bit better. Looking at the mall level, it's an intimidating and unique experience because of how large the setting feels. When you first get that map and open it up and you go, oh geez, I gotta go through all this? I mean, one floor is huge and it's got 3 floors. It makes everything feel just a little bit more scary because it makes you feel alone and lost in this huge labyrinth of a mall, especially the first time you play through it. Now, granted, you don't actually explore everything in the setting. In fact, you don't explore half of it. And the mall is actually a pretty short section of the game, but the sense of scale is huge regardless of that, and it's still effective in giving off the vibes of a large sprawling environment. I think Team Silent just did a really good job at making the mall feel really big because it has all these large open areas and it leads to everything feeling much bigger, even though it's actually a fairly short portion of the game. Along with that, of course, playing through this game multiple times, the first time the place feels pretty big, and then if you play through it a second time and you know what doors to go through and all that, of course, you shorten that segment of the game way down by a lot. But once again, on a first playthrough, especially with this being the opening of the game, it feels quite big. Of course, not every part of the game feels as sprawling or, in my opinion, as cool as I think this mall is, but overall I do kind of like the fact that a lot of this game actually takes place outside of Silent Hill. That might be kind of a controversial opinion. I know a lot of people wished it was more so in Silent Hill, but personally I like the areas that are outside of it. Now I do love the setting of Silent Hill, but if you put it into perspective of this series overall, previously we had 2 full games of pretty much only being in Silent Hill, so it's kind of nice to explore something else for once, even though the town is iconic. Part of this, I think for me, why I personally enjoy this so much, is because a lot of the environments outside of Silent Hill give off this kind of abandoned, urban decay, urban exploration type of vibe. It makes me feel like I'm in places where I don't belong, and all the odd noises don't help that. Of course, the town of Silent Hill also gives off big time abandoned types of vibes, but it feels kind of more small town in the way it does it. The feeling of Silent Hill 3's setting is noticeably different. It has that kind of, like I said, a sort of urban exploration tinge to it, and I really enjoy that aspect of it. This game, along with Silent Hill 4, which also features a lot of time spent outside the town of Silent Hill, proves to me that games aren't always about the town itself, but more like what the town represents and the baggage that our characters come with. And the fact that the town's existence and its residents can affect things even outside of it just makes the setting and the legend of the town feel that much more powerful. The levels themselves are designed in a very smart way that encourages natural exploration while making the environments feel large without actually being too huge or too annoying to backtrack through. Puzzles for the most part feel smart and make sense, and solving them involves just enough backtracking and item collection to make the game feel intense because of the large amount of enemies you undoubtedly are skipping killing on the way there to save ammo, but it's not so much backtracking that it feels frustrating. It's just enough to make it challenging. That's one thing I always liked about this game, and Silent Hill in general versus, say, Resident Evil, where you have to spend a lot of time managing your inventory, which undoubtedly leads to a lot of backtracking, especially if you like picking up every last items, and no such problem exists in this game, with backtracking only occurring when you get new key items, or if you're not sure if you actually checked that one door so you want to go back and check it again. That's pretty much the only time you backtrack. Overall, both the artistic and technical design of the levels in this game are probably my favorite among the series, and represent a step up from their predecessors in my opinion. Now let's talk about the actual nitty-gritty of gameplay itself. Silent Hill 3 feels quite a bit different than previous games in the way that the beginning plays out. I already mentioned how the amusement park opening starts by immediately putting you in the danger, but the rest of the game's opening is also quite dangerous. As Heather, you face multiple different types of enemies just within the mall level of the game, and each one of these enemies behaves differently, meaning that from the very start you have to face different types of threats, and each one you need to pay attention to. They come in various shapes and sizes and all have different attack styles. Some are fast, some are slow, some are somewhere in the middle, and overall it makes combat both interesting but also difficult, because many of the enemies you face near the beginning of the game are very hard to take out in melee combat, either because they're too fast or too powerful, and it's usually not worth it to waste your precious handgun ammo on them because there's just so damn many of them. So you often spend a lot of time running away from enemies, which of course makes backtracking more challenging and stressful. This, in my opinion, is a good thing, because in a survival horror game you want tension to stay high, and this game makes it feel like Heather is struggling to stay alive as you dodge the packs of rabid doubleheads, closers, and the awful pendulums, just to name a few. The enemy variety in this game is very much increased over Silent Hill 2. In the first hour and a half or so, you already encounter 5 different enemy types, and a new variation of a previous enemy, all of which are wildly different from each other. Compare this to the first 2 or so hours of Silent Hill 2, where everything that James Sunderland encounters is a vaguely female humanoid creature that all attack in a pretty similar fashion and don't pose all that much of a threat. James can just kind of bash his way through the apartments pretty easily. But like I said, in Silent Hill 3, combat is much more nuanced with Heather, because not all of the enemies can be taken down with the same strategy the way lying figures and mannequins can be taken out. I mean, seriously, try killing a double head with the pipe and see how well that works out. And in fact, I find most of the enemies here to be harder to take out than a lot of Silent Hill 2's foes. For the whole beginning of the game, you're pretty much running away from things because of the things that I mentioned before, and it's a pretty crazy way to start the game and much different from the slow, meandering build-up of Silent Hill 2. Now for the rest of the game, it's not quite as crazy, and once you start actually getting good weapons, it becomes easier to actually dispatch enemies, so things aren't actually as insane as they are, say, at the mall setting. But like I said, it's still a more varied combat experience than the games that came before it, and in my opinion, it's a noticeable improvement. Also, once again, you probably don't want to, even once you start getting all those shiny weapons like the shotgun and the SMG, you probably don't want to spend all your ammo killing all these enemies, because then you won't have a lot of ammo for the boss fights, which are going to make them a lot harder. Of course, everyone has their own strategy, but I just find that Silent Hill 3 in general involves a lot more running away from things than it does shooting them or beating them with sticks. Now as for graphics, this game looks amazing. I mean, it really does. Especially if you either play on PC with the 4K mod or play it in an emulator at a higher internal resolution. The character models look great, the animations are quite good, and the cutscenes are much improved over Silent Hill 2. Once again, the increased enemy variety is very nice, and as a result, we have all of these monster models that are absolutely terrifying to look at. The environments, like I mentioned earlier, give off these very eerie kind of urban decay vibes, and the whole game has a very lonely look and feel to it. It really is brilliant. I honestly think this game, with some very minor modification, looks absolutely gorgeous on today's hardware, especially when you consider the fact that this game came out in 2003. Now, of course, you know, today's games are gonna look better overall. This game doesn't have ray tracing or whatever, but it's amazing to me what they could do 17 years ago on hardware from 20 years ago.
You gonna let your hair color go back too?
I don't know. Don't you think blondes have more fun?
So in summary, I'll say that Silent Hill 3 does do a lot of the same things as its predecessors, but refines the gameplay with more enemy types, cooler areas to explore, and varied settings. Once again, refinement is the name of the game here. The combat, while still purposely clunky, is a bit more nuanced because of the increased enemy variety that Heather faces in this game. Speaking of which, of course, I really enjoyed the character of Heather as the protagonist, and I think she's really well done. In fact, all the characters are very well acted. And while this story is often overshadowed by the success of Silent Hill 2's story, I feel it's a very competent story that ends up being quite interesting with several twists and turns to it. I love the general vibe that this game has, and I know that while some people don't like all the cult stuff, I don't mind it at all. And I found the villains to be fairly convincing, actually. To some people, this game's always going to live in the shadow of what came before it. But playing through it, I can't help but notice all the little ways in which it improves over previous Silent Hill titles. It's got some of the smartest level and sound design in the whole series, and in my opinion, it's the most fun out of any of them while still being a hell of a survival horror game. It really is my favorite in the whole series. I absolutely love it, and I would recommend it to anyone. Alright everyone, that's going to do it for me today. Those are all my thoughts on this game and how it stacks up. I want to know how you all feel about Silent Hill 3. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Somewhere in between? What is your favorite Silent Hill game? Let me know in the comments. I do want to know. I like having these conversations with people. And as always, if you like my content, then don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.